Okay, chapter 18, subdivision and developments. In this chapter, we're going to talk about various methods of developing and subdividing land, identifying the impacts of environmental regulations and the laws, other laws on sales, health and safety, and building regulations. So, developing and subdividing land. Assemblage is when you combine two or more lots into one larger parcel. You're not going to get a you're not going to get a question on that, but that's what it is. Assemblage. You're putting together lots. You're assembling them to make it a larger lot. The increased value is known as plottage value. Okay. I never heard these terms or never used them outside of a classroom before. I don't think that you're going to get them on an exam either. Subdivider is a person who buys undeveloped acreage and then they divide it into smaller lots for sale to individuals or developers, or sometimes for the subdivider's own use, because the subdivider themselves can be a developer. After doing everything that's required to prepare the land for the development. Mm-hmm. So this is the job of a subdivider. They look at all the environmental issues. They look at they lay out the land for a way that it can possibly be subdivided, profitably be subdivided. They do all the requirements with the municipalities and the government and whatever's necessary to get the approvals for the construction, and then they sell that land ready to be built on. So the land, they could get a lot more for it when they do all that work. Okay? Or they could be the developer themselves and do the development as well. So the developer is the one that actually builds the homes or buildings on the lots. Then they sell them. Now, sometimes that builder can be the subdivider as well. So in New Jersey, when a second lot is sold off of a larger parcel, when you have a smaller lot sold off of a larger parcel, it's now classified as a subdivision. And New Jersey state law allows municipalities to decide what they constitute as a minor subdivision that doesn't require a public hearing and what constitutes a major subdivision that does require a public hearing. So a minor subdivision would be something like a small one or two lots. But once again, they leave it up to the municipalities. Minor subdivision could be 6 lots. It depends on what the municipality decides on, what constitutes a minor subdivision and what constitutes a large subdivision. Okay. Minor subdivisions do not require new streets or off-site development or public hearings for approval. Major subdivisions require public hearings to get approvals. They have a lot more issues to address, and they must give the public an opportunity to pose questions about them. Some examples of issues for larger subdivisions are roads, traffic, burdens on the local school district. If the subdivision's large enough, it's going to have an impact on those local schools, right? All that housing, all those additional families and kids that have to go to school. The use of the public works services, emergency services like police, fire, waste removal, water and sewage treatment, and drainage and environmental impact that it may have by clearing that land and putting up all this stuff. That all needs to be examined and addressed when getting these major subdivisions approved. Every municipality has a land plan on how they plan to use the land in the whole municipality. They also have what's known as a master plan. A master plan is a plan of how they're going to use all that land in the municipality. The master plan also goes over how are we going to handle the schooling, the emergency response from police and fire and medical services. How are we going to feed the people? How are we going to dispose of the waste? And what about water supply? And what, in case of a natural disaster or emergencies, how are we going to handle that? So every municipality has their own master plan. that they then submit to the county that they're in. The counties then submit all their master plans from all the municipalities to the state. Then the state creates a master plan, and then the state sends their master plan to the feds, to the federal government. So that's how it works throughout the United States and how our government works. So land planning precedes the actual subdivision process, which must comply with the municipality's master land plan. Planning boards and planning commissioners must be consulted. Dedication, that's a term we need to know. We heard about that in chapter 5, I believe, is when you give land to the government for a public use like streets, schools, and parks. Assurance by bonding that sewer and land costs, street costs will be paid for. Compliance with zoning ordinances governing the use and lot sizes, fire and safety ordinances, building and construction codes, etc. And we're going to learn about a percolation test before, this is part of the land planning stage. Before you could do a subdivision, you got to get a perk test done, also known as a percolation or perk test. It's a test of how well the soil absorbs liquids for runoff and drainage, or if there's going to be a septic system installed. What is that land's capacity to absorb the water, the liquids, which they call effluents, that drain into the ground? So when you have a septic tank, the solid waste break down in the tank and eventually get vacuumed out and hauled away. But the liquids, they move on and to what's known as a drain field, and then they filter off and sink into the soil, and they get filtered off naturally by the dirt. But the perk test determines how much liquids it can handle. What is the capacity? Is it even possible to build here? So let's highlight dedication is giving land, dedication of land for streets, schools, and parks. That's giving land to the government. Down here, we highlight percolation test of the soil's absorption and drainage capacities. So perk test, you'll see that on exams. You need to know what that is. Dedication, you need to know what that is. Okay. So here's a video for you showing how they do a perk test.
One of the first things to consider when building a house like this out in the country is a septic plan. What to do with the waste and water that needs to leave that building. Now, it needs to go into a septic system. There's a couple of key components to a septic system. One is a septic tank. Now, this tank will accept waste and water. Now, the solids will stay in the tank and be broken down over time by bacteria. But the water that'll pass through the tank will now go out through a leach field. Now, a leach field is a series of pipes, perforated pipes, that sit below the substrate of the soil, and the water will trickle or drip down through the ground. Now, to determine if you can even have a septic system, it starts with a perk test. Brendan Zabricki's with the town of Essex. You've had your share of perk tests, right?
I sure have.
So what's a perk test?
Well, that stands for a percolation test, and it's a field test to simulate how wastewater will travel down through the soil once a septic system is built on top of it.
How fast it'll pass through, sort of like water going down through the coffee grounds in a filter.
That's a good analogy, yes.
Right. Okay. So what have you done to get us to this point?
Well, previous to this, we dug several deep holes, about 10 feet down into the ground.
Okay.
That allowed us to get a look at the various soil layers that you're going to find whenever you dig here in New England.
All right, so this is topsoil. What are you seeing? What am I seeing?
Well, as you just mentioned, this is your topsoil. Then you go through a layer known as subsoil. You then finally get down to a layer that is really the glacial material. In other words, the glacier brought it in.
Yeah.
We have determined that this is the most restrictive or most limiting layer in the soil profile. And the septic system code requires that we actually perform the perk test in that most limiting
So
layer.
you're testing at almost the worst place.
The worst place that you're going to have underneath that system, that's
All right.
correct.
So that looks pretty dense right here, so not
That's
accept
right.
water too well.
That's exactly right. So what we did after that is, knowing what we had in the deep holes, we just had the machine dig down a shelf to the top of that most restrictive layer,
right.
and we're ready to dig a perk hole that's about 12 inches in diameter and about 18 inches deep.
Okay.
Then we're going to fill that hole with water and let the hole sit for a little while to make it saturated. That will be a great simulation of how soil will behave when it's wet underneath a leach facility. Then we will use a ruler to watch the rate at which the water drops down through the hole over time.
Yeah.
And that will give us what's called a perk rate, or percolation
So what
rate.
happens if the rate doesn't drop fast enough?
If it doesn't drop fast enough, that would be a limitation to the site, that you may not be able to build a septic system in this particular
This is a pretty important
location.
test then.
It is very important. So now I'm just going to take this water, pour it into the hole against a board that I've already got set up.
What's the board do?
What this does is it puts the water into the hole more gently so that we do not stir up the fine material in there.
Yeah.
And we want to bring this water level up to about 12 inches, and we're going to maintain that level for about 15 minutes, again, to simulate saturated conditions in the soil.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll check that. We're about 9 so far, so we're going to need another bucket of water, Richard.
All right, Brennan, it has been 15 minutes.
We want to see the time it takes to go from 9 inches down to 6 inches. Well, it dropped down to 6 inches in about 27 minutes.
So is that good?
Yeah, I've seen quicker than that, but it's somewhere right in the middle.
But you're telling us that we passed the test, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you for your help on the perk test.
Of course.
Thanks for watching. This will happen.
So that's how they do a perk test. That's how they test the soil. It's pretty simple. They just pour water and they time it. They try to figure it out. Well, all right, so in subdividing land, a subdivider seeks out raw land that they could profitably subdivide. They determine if proposed use is consistent with the local zoning ordinances. They locate financial backers, and then they initiate marketing strategies, all before they ever even purchase the property. Title to individual parcels is transferred as lots are sold using a blanket mortgage, which has a partial release clause that would allow them to sell off those smaller lots off the larger ones. You see how when we're building a picture of what we learned now, we're building a story. Now, impact fees are usually paid to municipalities by a developer to help the community cope with added demand and use of services. An example would be police, fire department, schools, garbage, public works, water, sewage, etc. So they may pay a fee, a percentage of the sales price to the municipality, or they could agree to build a school or donate a couple police cars or a fire truck. This is what I refer to as the legal bribes in order to get your project approved that the municipality asks for. And they should, because it does have an impact on the developing community. So the municipality can ask for these things. However, there's a new thing that's been going around a lot in New Jersey called the pilot program. Now, the pilot program is meant to give huge tax breaks to developers if those properties that they're constructing contain affordable, low income or affordable housing. But the problem we're seeing a lot in a lot of these towns, a lot of these corrupt politicians that we have, they're using the pilot program to give huge tax breaks to developers, and then they don't build any low income or affordable housing. And then so why are the politicians going along with this? because they're probably getting payoffs in the back or support to their financial for their political campaigns. They're getting some finances donated to them, for their support in their political campaigns. If they work to help the developers get these huge long-term tax breaks where they don't pay any taxes on the property or very little taxes on the property for years to come. Cities are getting screwed. They're not getting anything out of this, not even that low-income housing, which is the whole purpose of the pilot programs. That's happening in my town right now. These developers are getting long-term tax breaks and with the promise that they're going to build low-income housing, and then they don't build the low-income housing. It's never part of their plan. So I should add something in here about pilot programs, although it's not going to be on exams. So maybe I shouldn't leave it off for now. So here we got where they talk about the story here in the book on page 341. I wrote using a blanket mortgage with a partial release clause. So title to individual parcels of subdivided land is transferred as lots are sold. Yeah, using a blanket mortgage with a partial release clause. And then down here it talks about impact fees are intended to help a community cope with the increased demand for schools or other services. Now they talk about how subdivisions are laid out by lot and block number. Yeah, I showed you tax maps in your town, which are laid out by lot and block number, because your whole city is laid out that way, by lot and block number. That's how we do it. Your municipality is comprised of a bunch of subdivisions, which were laid out by lot and block number. But then they just add it to the entire overall map of the city. So a blanket mortgage, once again, is that loan to buy the whole property, and then as smaller lots are sold off of the larger one, it's paid back in portions, not all at once. Because most mortgage loans have an alienation clause, the due on sale clause that says that when a property is sold, the loan needs to be paid off in full. However, the blanket mortgage has something called a partial. It's like a custom alienation clause, the partial release clause, that allows smaller lots to be sold off of the larger one, and then only part of the loan is paid back instead of the entire loan being paid back at once, like most loans require, because they have alienation clause in them, which is also known as the due on sale clause, that would require the entire loan to be paid off if you sell it. Okay, this is like a modified alienation clause. It allows only part of the loan to be required to be paid back as you sell off smaller lots off of the larger one. And here's a graphic that could show you that. You have one lot, it was subdivided into 6. They build houses on them. As they sell off one of them, you only pay back 1/6, and so on and so forth. As you sell off those lots, you pay back the lender a portion of the loan. Here is the municipal tax map that shows you lots and block numbers. The dark colors and the dark numbers in a box, or sometimes they can be found in a circle. Those are the block numbers, and each individual lot is numbered consecutively as well. So here you can see block number 334. And you can see it's numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are all the lots that go all the way around. And sometimes they could be divided like this. Lot number 7.01, 7.02, 801, 802, 8.02. And it goes all the way around. You can see that this particular property has 23 lots. Okay. I guess if you count these as one, but they're broken down 8.01, 8.02. Anyway, that's the way that they could number the lots. And when you go and get a listing, it's not a bad idea to look up your the tax maps so you could get an idea of the dimensions of the lot size of the property before you ever even get there and look at their survey. Hopefully they'll have it for you.
So I saw a question somewhere. It was uh, it was like north, west, highway. I mean, too much of you know. It was like a street address,
Okay.
and the question and the answers were also like northwest, southeast, head
Okay.
to something like that. So we will read it in this
I think,
chapter.
yeah, I think, no, that's chapter 19 where we start getting into
Okay, okay,
surveys.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're talking about surveys. You're reading ahead. You're getting a little confused. You're reading ahead there. Um, but your property address is not a legal description of land. Only a survey is, or a plat map, which is a map of a subdivision. Okay, this is a tax map. Now, this at one point was a plat map of a subdivision, and then they just added it on to the other maps. So usually there'll be a number like somewhere up top here that says, okay, well, this map, you see it right here, sheet number 22. So sheet number 22 connects right here, and then it expands to show you the whole city. And then there'll be different sheets on the other side. See, there's another sheet over here. You can't read it. It's off screen. And they just add the different subdivision maps to it to build out the whole municipality. Okay. Here they show you block number 335, lot 5. So block number 335, lot number 5 is right here. So you could see that by looking up somebody's tax records. You could see what their lot and block number are. And then you pull up these tax maps, and then you could actually see the dimensions of the lot and where it's located. You can see this is on a curved road. You can see this is not a perfectly square or rectangular shaped lot. Look at the lot behind it. It's not perfectly square either, and then it's got a weird angle that goes over here and then cuts out. So that's a weird little part there. So this lot does not have four corners. Look, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one has five corners. So if they're getting a survey done, the surveyor, you could pay them extra to put a stake in the ground at each of the corners of the lot. And this one would require 5 because it has 5 corners, not 4 like normal, like this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you could tie a string around those pieces of metal rebar so that you could visually see where your property line is. So if you're putting up a fence, that can be useful. But lot and block number and address of a property are not considered legal descriptions of land. Did you know that the post office can change your address on you? It's not common, but it does happen. They could change your address on your property. I've had that happen for a listing of mine once before, where they changed the address on the guy's property. They shifted the address of every house on his block, or almost every house, because they built a new house in between. So instead of just giving it a different kinds of an address, like a 136B, they shifted all the address numbers all the way down the block. All right. That could be a nightmare for people because now they all got to change their IDs at motor vehicle, change their addresses on file with their billings for all their stuff. And oh, what a headache, right? All right. So part of subdivision planning is the developer has to lay out the plan. The subdivider has to lay out the plan for the streets, the layouts. Are they going to go with the classic gridiron street pattern, with just these rectangular blocks, or are they going to go with a curvilinear style pattern? And then what about the layout of the land? Um, are they going to have the conventional garden estate style where people get the larger lots? Or are they going to have a clustered estate style where people have smaller lot sizes, but there's more open space? You can see both of these have approximately the same amount of houses here, but there's way more open space parkland on the clustered estates. That means people have much smaller lot sizes. Here's a small plat map of a small subdivision in a town. You could see that this layout here, this is all one property. This black line lays out the boundaries of this property. And here you can see the dotted line to accent the street. Now, this property, this is a cul-de-sac street that was built on the property. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lots where they're going to build houses on it. Okay. So in this subdivision plat map, the owner of the land can name the street that they're putting there, but they also have to put, when they're submitting their plans to the municipality for approval, they have to put down whether they're going to dedicate that street or keep it private so that the city knows. And look, they have layouts here for easements, for public utility easements running on the land. So what is a plat? It's a map of a subdivision indicating the location and boundaries of each of the individual properties. It's also a legal description of land. Look, it's a layout, it's a survey. You can see this lot is 50 foot wide, 100 feet deep on this side, 70 feet in the back, 80 feet on this side. 70 feet by 100 feet over here. This one's perfect rectangle. This one, not so much because it gets cut into that cul-de-sac street area, right? But you can see the layouts of the land and the measurements. So what is a plat? It's a map of a subdivision indicating the location and boundaries of the individual properties. That you need to know. All right, covenants and restrictions. These are restrictions placed in deeds by private parties, not by the government. So these restrictions that are placed in deeds are referred to as restrictive covenants. A covenant is a legal promise. These happen to be restrictions on the property, and the person who gets the property promises to follow and obey those restrictions. They're placed in deeds by the owner, which could be the subdivider, private parties, not the government, which has its own powers that can restrict the use of the land. So we went over this in chapter 9 with the government powers. The estates in land based on restrictions are called fee determinable, defeasible fee, or conditional fee estates. We went over that in chapter 6. A moratorium, that you'll probably get on an exam, added to your definition list, is a halt to further development in the area. It's important for a developer to record their permits and their approvals for the subdivision in the public records. Because in the event that they call a moratorium to put a halt to further development in the area, if you had all your project's approvals recorded in the public records, even after they call a moratorium, you could still move forward with your construction project. However, if those approvals were not recorded yet, you cannot. So that's an important thing to do. When you get your approvals for your construction, to record those approvals in the public record, because if you don't, that could create a problem. And the FHA has minimum standards for new construction materials and occupancy requirements, which must be a majority of the owner occupants, not renter occupants, if that complex is to be FHA approved, so buyers can be able to get FHA loans. The development costs, this is an interesting factoid. How much does it cost to build the subdivision? Well, it's estimated to be roughly 4 to 6 times the cost of the raw land to develop a subdivision. There's a lot involved in that. Well, the mass earthworks removal, the legal stuff, the engineering, the construction and materials, the contractors, the real estate agents and their commissions. There's a lot that plays into that. The density zoning is zoning that restricts for the maximum number of homes that can be built per acre. Another way of saying that is zoning for the most homes that can be built per acre. So, density zoning, moratorium, and restrictive covenants. Estates based on restrictions called fee determinable, defeasible fee, or conditional fee estates. Okay. So here's where we do the highlights of all that stuff. Page 343. Dedicated means turned over to the municipality. Moratorium's a halt to further development. Restrictive covenants are restrictions placed in deeds by private parties. We went over that chapter 6, page 104. You already got all this stuff? Okay. So here's that factoid. It's not on exams, talking about the cost of the development 4 to 6 times. You don't have to highlight or study this. It's just good to know. Yeah. Now, density zoning, these are ordinances that restrict the average maximum number of homes that can be built per acre, or zoning for the maximum amount of homes that can be built per acre. Another way of saying the same thing. New Jersey's environmental issues on subdivisions. These are problems with past use of that property. You could have an old property that could have been a dump, a city dump at one time, and now they're constructing new houses on it. The future owner may not ever know about this. So it's important that environmental studies be done. We call them EIS, Environmental Impact Study Reports, that could have an impact on your project. Okay. It's required before any federal project that affect the quality of life, like contamination. It requires info about planned projects and possible solutions. Environmental impact of this project being built. You have to check for contamination. Maybe see if there's a rare species of animal or insect or something that's on that property. If they find out that there's during your project, like a rare species of an owl took up a breeding ground in a tree on the property, that's going to tank your construction project because the environmentalists won't allow you to move forward on it. They got to take a look at the traffic, how the traffic's going to be impacted, the area, drainage issues, etc. Now, if human remains are found on the property, whoop, that's going to stop your project immediately. They need to see now, are those human remains recent? Is this a crime scene? Or is there some sort of historical significance to these bones that were found on the property? So that's going to put a halt to development until we get the police and the coroner out there, right? They need to do a little research there, then maybe even get the historic society out if those are old bones. And we got a lot of history here in New Jersey, right? So it could be a historic thing. Look at this famous example that I give down at the bottom. You remember the World Trade Centers when the terrorists attacked the World Trade Centers and brought them down? They were building the Freedom Tower. And during that construction for the foundation of the Freedom Towers, they went a lot deeper than the original Twin Towers were. They had a parking garage that was several stories down beneath it. But they actually built, they dug it deeper. And when they were digging it, doing that mass earthworks removal and building for the foundation, did you hear what they found underneath it? They found a ship underneath where the World Trade Centers used to stand. Look, see, I'm full of this useless knowledge. Here's an example of it.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty significant find. It's the kind of thing that archaeologists are always hoping.
And then you put it full screen here for you. Sorry about that. Let's skip that ad.
Timber cribbing features or landfill retaining structures on either side, sunk them to the bottom of the river and used it to create new land along the waterfront. At this point, we really don't know much, so we kind of just have to continue our analysis, see what's under the boat, what's in the dirt around it, and see if that can tell us anything. We're assuming it was placed here in the early 1800s based on historic maps and how they show us how the shoreline progressed. Basically, they would just sink it little by little and gradually extend the shoreline and usually build new wharves and piers out into the river, leaving a slip in between so boats could continue to sail in and out. And then as waterfront land became more and more valuable and more necessary, they would continue filling in and extending the shoreline gradually. And it's tied into commerce and trade of the early 19th century. There have been ships found in the city before. There was a famous one on Water Street found in the early 1980s. And it's the kind of thing that everyone always hopes to find. It's an exciting find. It's a big find. It's something that's interesting. We can get a lot of information about it. It's a very unique part of history that, we wouldn't have access to otherwise.
And you could actually even see, if you go to, if you look this up, you could see a lot more videos about it, like on National Geographic and whatnot. They show you what artifacts they actually found from that ship underneath it, and in those right there, you're just seeing like the bottom of the ship and the wood planks. But they ended up carbon dating the wood from those ships, and they found that it came from trees that came from the same area where the Liberty Bell, the structure that held the Liberty Bell came from in the New England. And so it's pretty interesting. They found coins, they found some jewelry, they found some other things, from that era. And this is lost history that was underneath there. Like she was saying, she's explaining how where the World Trade Centers are. Have you ever been to New York? Have you ever been where the World Trade Centers were? You see how far away from the water it is? That it sits where the water used to be. That shows you how Manhattan is mostly man-made. They sunk ships, they filled them with rocks and dirt, like she was saying, to build up the shoreline. And they did that half of Manhattan. If you ever look at historic maps of it, it was like really skinny. And over the years, how wide it got. It's a peninsula, yeah, and it was man-made. But just think of the effort that it took. They didn't have the heavy machinery back then that we have today to do the mass earthworks removal or adding all of that dirt and rocks and mud. This was all done by hand. That's incredible how they were able to build that up the way that they did and how quickly they did it back then without having all those modern day machinery.
To find
Anyway, that could put a halt to your construction project, as you could see here with the Freedom Towers, the very important very important project got put on halt while you have archaeologists now, well, taking pictures and taking samples, removing the wood, doing all that stuff. That that took a while to get done. When they find a ship, or if they find bodies or bones or something like that, it's going to put a halt to your construction project, no matter how big or small it is. Okay, so federal agencies are required to conduct studies called environmental impact studies, or EIS, for any federal project that could affect the quality of the life, especially projects located in floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes, or other environmentally fragile areas. Okay. Look, in this previous sentence, they talk about how land has been used in the past by chemical companies, dry cleaners, old farms, trash dumps, underground tanks, airports, warehouses, gas stations, and then they end up building them up to be something else years later. The unsuspecting new homeowner wouldn't know that the ground was contaminated under their feet. So these environmental impact studies are an important part to be able to get done, but still they manage to cover it up sometimes, because what was the chapter several chapters ago? I think it was chapter 8 or 9. I showed you a bunch of videos where it was talking about underground oil tanks and contamination and such, and how abandoned gas stations, it was a series of videos, how old gas stations were built near, new housing was built near old gas stations, and those contaminated grounds. And it's stuff was not disclosed. But today, even though they say they got all this stuff in place too, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with corruption, you're dealing with a lot of nonsense. Like the Clark Shopping Center. You familiar with the Clark Shopping Center? Or is that Cranford? Clark, where they meet over there. I think it's called the Clark Shopping Center, though. You have the Whole Foods on one side with a bunch of stores in that shopping center, and across the street you got a golf course with a building there for the club where people. It's a restaurant and where the club members meet and such. That was all built on contaminated soil. Those used to be factories on one side of the street and the other, and they both contaminated the ground. The one where the golf course was way worse contaminated. My dad read me an article in a newspaper, I guess, because he didn't have nobody to tell it to, and he thought it was humorous, and I was there. He's like, look at this property here is so contaminated that they said that it can't be built on for 1,000 years. But look, they already got a golf course there and a restaurant. I'm not that old, 1,000 years. So how did they do it? Well, there's shortcuts, I guess the EPA and the NJDEP allow. And in that case, they removed and replaced the top 6 feet of soil, contaminated soil, with fresh soil. And I guess that was good enough. See, the examples of videos we were showing showed you how in residential property they hold it to much higher standards than they do for commercial property when it comes to environmental cleanups. Now, what happens if years later now they're going to build, residential houses on top of that? Unsuspecting people may not realize they're built it on contaminated land. So The DEP regulates the environmentally sensitive wetland areas where water is, which could carry contaminants for distances and across other people's properties. So the DEP regulates anytime construction gets done in certain areas. Now, your municipality, you got to get building permits from. If it's a historic section, you got to get permission from the Historic Society. But near and in certain environmentally sensitive areas, the New Jersey DEP has authority to regulate construction in those areas too. In the wetland areas, it's the Wetlands Protection Act of 1970 that gives them that authority. In the highland areas, it's the Highland Water Protection Act. In the pinelands, it's the Pinelands Protection Act. In the coastal areas, it's the CAFRA. And they also have the Waterfront Development Act as well. So builders should consult a guide called Buy Bob that stands for Before You Buy, Before You Build. This would dictate who you need to get permission from before you could build in certain areas. I know I had one guy in my class years ago from Piscataway.
No need to remember all these acts, or
No,
we have to. Okay.
no, just know you don't need to memorize them. You just need to know if they give you a question like, what gives the DEP the authority to regulate these areas? They're usually named after the areas, the laws. Like the wetlands, the Wetlands Act. The highlands, it's the Highlands Act. The pinelands, the Pinelands Act. You know, it's pretty simple, stupid. You should be able to figure it out. You know, you don't need to memorize it. Okay. So if they ask you what law gives the DEP the authority to regulate the highlands? Well, it's the Highlands Water Protection Act. In the pinelands, it's the Pinelands Protection Act. In the wetlands, it's the Wetlands Protection Act. You see, so you don't need to study that. It's pretty self-explanatory there. But this is just more of an understanding that if you're working with builders or people who are constructing something, if it's in certain areas, that they may need to get permission from these groups. Historic Society, if it's in a historic section of town, in addition to the city's building department, in addition to maybe the DEP. Because, like I was saying, I had a guy years ago in my class lived in Piscataway. Okay, he had a house there, and his front porch also had it was a covered front porch. It was collapsing because it was getting eaten up by termites. So he caught the termite damage, had it treated, but the front steps were a hazard. They were destroyed. So somebody's going to get killed if they walk on his front steps. So he needed to get it fixed. So he had to tear down his front porch and the overhang and get it replaced. And he went to the city to get a permit. And the city said, okay, well, you're also going to need to get permission from the DEP because you're within, I think it was like 300 or 600 feet from a water source. And he's like, what? He's like, I'm not within so many feet of a water source. There's no water around here. And they were like, okay, well, there's a gully like across the street and down the way a bit. There's a gully that's been dry. It hasn't seen water in years, but it's meant for like flooding as a runoff. And during Obama's presidency, when President Obama was president, he gave a wide sweeping new regulatory authority to the EPA. And the EPA delegates some of that and shares their power with local states that have environmental agencies. We have the DEP. And they gave them wide sweeping authority to regulate certain areas that they didn't have the power previously to regulate. And so, with great power comes, abuse of power often. And so he went to them to get permission. He got the permission from the city to rebuild his porch, went to the DEP, and they said, no. And he's like, what do you mean, no? He's like, my porch is eaten by termites. It's collapsing. Someone's going to die when the roof falls on, when it collapses and the roof of the covered porch falls on somebody. You're saying that I cannot rebuild it? They said, no, it's going to put you closer, your house close within the water supply there. And he's like, it's a dry riverbed for runoff. He said, and it's not going to increase the footprint closer to the water. I already have a porch there. It's just eaten by termites. I'm just looking to replace what I got. And they were giving him a hard time about it. And he said, okay, if you're going to do that, I need something from you in writing that is denying me permission to rebuild my porch, and that you're going to take your agency is going to take responsibility when someone gets killed or hurt, that your agency is taking responsibility because you're denying me to do the repair on that house. I'm not building something new closer to the water. I'm just rebuilding what I have, you know. And then they eventually succumb to that, and they're like, okay, here's, begrudgingly they gave them the permit to build it. See, this is how sometimes these environmental agencies can abuse their power as well. Okay. There was a whole messes of abuses of power that we haven't heard about. You know, we got all these people that praise Obama, you know, for this and that. Oh, he's the great communicator. Yeah, he was. He's a very folksy guy. You know, he could talk to people, got that silver tongue. But he was a great divider amongst people. You know, we're seeing that today. He also put together all of these well-meaning, well-intentioned environmental regulations that ended up having standoffs with farm owners, because there were environmental agencies were telling farm owners they couldn't have their animals graze on the land that they always grazed on before, because now there's a, desert turtle that walks there, and the farm animals, if they step on them, they could kill them, you know. And so they went out there fully armed with their rifles to prevent the farmer from grazing his animals there. And he's like, listen, my family's been grazing our animals here since before this was a country, before this country was formed. And anyway, the family ended up having a standoff with them on their own property over environmental issues. And the environmental governmental agency that was, you know, abusing their powers, their new powers that the president gave them, ended up shooting and killing the father, and then arresting the two adult sons, you know, and throwing them in jail. It wasn't until Trump became president. Now, he had nothing to do with this, but it wasn't until he became president where the Supreme Court took up this case, and they found that the environmental agency overstepped their authority, gave an apology to the family, and released them from prison. Yeah, but that doesn't bring back their dad that they killed, you know. And it had all kinds of other wide sweeping things. Previously, you know, on farms, you could have puddles. You know, you got farm equipment that rides on dirt roads, and when it rains, water collects there. Well, under these new regulations, if the water that's sitting on the ground measures so much in size over a certain amount, it could be designated in an area that's regulated by the EPA. And then they could regulate what kind of construction and what you do in that area on your own property. You know, where previously it was not regulated. I got a bunch of videos over that. I'm not going to show any of them, waste your time over this, but just so that you understand how government can play, and politics can play a big role in real estate, and how you could use your own real estate. You know, whether it's replacing a termite-eaten front porch, or if it's continuing to farm your own land. These powers can be abused if we don't keep our politicians in check. You can't just vote along party lines. You should make sure our politicians are doing the right things. Okay. So here's just more slides that show you about what gives the DEP, the New Jersey DEP, the power to regulate certain areas. Well, the Highlands Water Protection and Planning Act protects New Jersey drinking water when paving over 1 acre or more. The Pinelands Protection Act regulates 22% of the state's land, which is the Pine Barrens, the Pinelands, the Pineland National Reserve, goes by many names. We have the Wetlands Act that requires a permit to excavate, fill, or build on certain areas and covers both coastal areas and inland freshwater areas, anywhere that it's wet or could see water. CAFRA, the Coastal Area Facility Review Act, clusters for open space and planned unit developments, where you could now build closer together than normally allowed. And the Waterfront Development Act regulates outside CAFRA areas. The DEP must approve plans for waterfront development on any navigable water or stream. After Sandy, FEMA redrew flood maps, which then gave them more regulatory powers for more areas when they were redrawn and saying, hey, water could go here. Combine that with the powers that Obama gave the EPA, that now they could regulate even more area. So that Buy Bob guide is good for builders and developers. Okay, now we got the Interstate Sales Full Disclosure Act. Not the first time we went over this. I think we touched on this in chapter 1 or 2. These rules are intended to protect the public from unscrupulous developers and marketers from undue sales pressure, like with timeshare sales. Buyers have 7 calendar days to cancel the contract for the purchase or lease of such lands that are new construction only, not the resale timeshares, but the initial sale. Advertisements for new construction for out-of-state properties that are marketed to New Jersey residents are also covered. You know, those large in-state subdivisions that have at least 100 lots, but not less than 10. If there are common area elements involved, it could be as little as 10 units. That stipulate all contracts and disclosures must be available in the same language that the property's advertised in. Okay, so if you advertise a property in a language other than English, doesn't matter if it's in-state property or out-of-state property, there's laws that cover them both. All the contracts and disclosures have to be made available in that same language. And you cannot be the one that translates them. They need to be professionally done with legal, by professional transcriptors or translators, because there are some words used in the everyday English language that have a separate legal meaning to them. And if they're used in contracts, it may not, if you just translate it, it may not translate properly in legalese, you know. So this language requirement states that all new construction advertised in New Jersey, which also applies to out-of-state properties marketed to New Jersey residents, must be available in the language that the property was advertised in. So you'll get a question based on that scenario on your exams. So let me give you an example. A property is advertised for sale in Spanish. Do all the contracts and disclosures need to be available in English only, Spanish only, English and Spanish, or I don't deserve a real estate license? Which answer should it be?
Spanish only.
Spanish only, right. Because why did you answer Spanish only? Because the question only talked about Spanish. It didn't say anything about it being advertised in English. See, a lot of people, what they do is they assume that it's going to be advertised in English. So therefore, if you advertise it in Spanish, it's going to be in Spanish as well. Okay. Don't assume anything. If the question doesn't talk about it, don't assume anything. So you got it right. You got it right. All right. So here's that stuff about the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, intended to protect the public from unscrupulous developers and marketers from undue sales pressure, as in with those timeshare sales. And the Real Estate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act requires prior approval and registration of those properties with the Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales Control, which is a division within the Real Estate Commission. They actually go out and they inspect these properties, make sure they exist, make sure this project is actually getting built before it's marketed to New Jersey residents. They want to make sure that everything is licensed and bonded and it's a real project and somebody's not trying to sell you some swampland in Florida, because that has happened before in the past. So the Bureau is actually an office within the Real Estate Commission that investigates these things. The Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales Control. Before any project can be offered to the public, it needs to get approval from that bureau. Okay. Now, when they get all of that, buyers have up to 7 calendar days to cancel contracts for the purchase or lease of those properties. And similar regulations apply to sales within the state with large subdivisions when the ownership of common area elements is involved. And in that case, then it's a minimum of 10 units. Okay. And here's where it says properties. This addresses non-New Jersey properties, but you should write all above it because it's not just for non-New Jersey. It also deals with New Jersey properties as well. That when you advertise a property in a language other than English, all the contracts and disclosures have to be available in that same language that it was advertised. And that applies to both new and existing new construction and existing properties when it comes to advertising properties in the same language or having all the contracts and disclosures available in the same language that's advertised. Now, we have everything available in English and Spanish, but other languages may not. So if you advertise it in another language, you better get it professionally transcripted first. If you want to advertise real estate in a different language other than the English and Spanish, I would suggest just advertising your services and not a particular property. That could make it a lot easier because then you don't need all the contracts and disclosures available in that language because you're just advertising your general services, helping people look for real estate, etc.
Are the real estate courses also available in Spanish language, or it's just in exams?
I don't know. I get people asking all the time about it, and
I was just curious. When I went for driving license, it was English and Spanish, so I was a little stuck.
Well, I had somebody tell me, actually, in my previous class to this one, I actually had a lady tell me that she took the exam in Spanish because it's an option. And she said, but it's like old Spanish. It doesn't translate well. So it's like a bad translation of Spanish when you take the exam. So as if the exam's not hard enough, now they give you a bad translation of the language. So she said that it actually made it harder. She's like, it's a horrible translation. I was like, okay, thank you for letting me know. I'll let my future classes know about that. It is, yeah. So she told me that it's a bad translation. I guess it could be kind of like an AI translation thing that they used, but as far as classes being available, yes, classes can be approved in other languages, but they need to be approved by the Real Estate Commission. So Spanish, yeah, they can be. I don't know anybody that offers them. I've heard of it in the past, but the schools that offered it aren't around anymore. So I don't know. It's a niche. Are you going to get a big enough demand for it? I don't know. Demand varies greatly. Look at our class. We had a class of 8 people. 4 people showed up. I mean, 8 people is a small class. 4 people showed up. Today, it's just you remaining, So, I mean, what's going on with these classes that people are taking? I know a lot of people sign up for these the budget discount classes, but they don't include anything, and then they nickel and dime you. They say, yeah, you can take a class for $100. Okay, book is extra, school exams extra, certifying your hours with the state is extra. It's like everything is extra and it ends up costing you more than what I charge. And they nickel and dime you. And they don't allow you free retakes or supply you recordings or all that other stuff. So yeah, I really don't know what others are doing, but we don't offer it because I don't know how I would regulate it, make sure that things are working properly because I don't speak Spanish. So it would be a difficult thing to try to regulate um, to make sure everybody's teaching it right and proper. Maybe someday in the future I'll learn Spanish or something. I don't know. Maybe I'll learn Polish. I'm Polish and I don't even understand that. So I don't foresee that happening. But who knows? You never know. Never say never. Okay, so rules are intended to protect the public from unscrupulous developers or marketers with the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, from undue sales pressure with those timeshares. Buyers have 7 calendar days to cancel the contracts for the purchase or lease of those lands. And advertisements for new construction of out-of-state properties marketed to New Jersey residents and large in-state subdivisions with 100 lots or common area elements with at least 10 units stipulate all contracts and disclosures must be available in the same language that the property is advertised in. But that also applies to existing properties and not just new ones. So the language requirement applies to all properties advertised in New Jersey, not just the new ones from both in and out of state properties, out of the state. Okay. The UCC, that's the state's minimum standard for construction, the Uniform Construction Code. In the last chapter, we were talking about business sales, and we went over a UCC, which was the Uniform Commercial Code, particularly the Section 6, which is the Bulk Transfer Act that regulates chattel, the tangible personal property that goes with the business sale. This chapter, we're talking about a different UCC, the Uniform Construction Code. That's the state's minimum standard for construction. And those building codes are enforced by the DCA in Trenton if your local municipality doesn't have their own code enforcement department. It regulates construction, alterations, renovation, occupancy, and use of all buildings if your municipality doesn't have its own building code enforcement officials. Either way, the DCA inspects public buildings and schools and commercial properties like large shopping centers and buildings with 3 or more units, not counting the unit the owner or landlord lives in. Okay. So even if your city has its own building code enforcement, commercial properties, schools, shopping centers, buildings with 3 or more units, they get inspected by the state still. The 3 or more units, we call that the green card inspection. That's the industry lingo for it. It's actually called the state inspection, but the industry lingo, real estate agents refer to it as the green card. They may just tell you, hey, is this property up to date on the green card? That's what they're talking about. It has nothing to do with immigration. Okay, they're talking about a different kind of green card. This is the pass. When it gets a state inspection and it passes, the card that they used to give was green in color. So that's where the name came from, green card. Okay. Now, this is good to know, but it's not on exams. But you should put a little bracket around there, put good to know. Building codes are always updated and created. New codes are put in place all the time. Does that mean that older buildings now need to be brought up to code because they create a new building code rule? No. It cannot require older buildings now to be updated because they created a law. Unless there are alterations to that old building. So existing buildings do not have to conform unless they're found unsafe.
I can't hear you.
You can't?
Yeah, now I can.
You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. That was weird. Your internet connection is unstable. Nope, that's Zoom. It's not my internet connection. That's the application for Zoom. Let me know if you have any problems hearing me, all right? because that's definitely not my internet connection. I have a gigabit fiber optic connection here, so it shouldn't be a problem on my side. I pay $200 a month for this connection. It shouldn't be a it shouldn't be an issue on my side. Um, so it says the existing buildings do not have to conform unless they're found unsafe. When alterations or repairs cost more than half the value of an existing building, however, the entire building must be brought up to code when alterations amount to between 25 and 50% of the new value. Only the new construction must conform. Okay, so anything half the value or more, the entire building needs to be brought up to code. Any repairs or alterations between 25 and 50% of the value of the building, only those new modifications need to be brought up to code. Okay. I had to give that advice to several building owners on commercial properties in the past. So we have something called the New Warranty and Builders Registration Act. It basically says that all construction in the state of New Jersey must come with a 10-year warranty from the builder. Now, the builder registers and purchases this warranty from the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs in Trenton. They can't self-insure because what if they go out of business? You know, where does that leave the homeowner that bought that home? So builders, any new construction they do, they're required by law in New Jersey to buy a 10-year warranty for any home buyers. It's good for 10 years. It's transferable with the new owners, etc. It's not just for the new home buyer. But I know they say for varying periods up to 10 years. What does that mean? See, it says under the new Home Warranty Builders and Registration Act, all builders of new homes must register a warranty against new home defects for varying periods up to 10 years with the DCA. What does that mean? It is a 10-year warranty. It's just that everything's not covered for 10 years. Like the HVAC system may be only covered for the first 3 years. You know, certain things have different warranty periods for varying periods, but the structure itself is warranted up to 10 years. Okay. So all new construction must come with this. So if you know somebody that bought a new home, it's not 10 years old and they're having problems with it, but they don't have the warranty, they could reach out to the DCA in Trenton. You could give them the guidance to reach out to the Department of Community Affairs in Trenton, which has a copy of that. Well, they don't just have a copy. They're the ones that are insuring it. So you could reach out to them and they'll have the warranty on file for that property. Okay. And enforcement, if there's no local building code enforcement in your municipality, because maybe your municipality is really small, maybe they share code enforcement, one code enforcement official amongst both two municipalities, a neighboring municipality. Or if they don't want to do that, then the DCA, the state inspectors, will be in charge of doing any inspection in that municipality. Construction permits have to be issued before any construction, alteration, demolition, or change of use of occupancy of a building can be undertaken. So how do construction permits work? The UCC requires a construction permit before any of those alterations or construction. Applicants must provide info like the location of the property, the construction plans, estimated cost of the work, names and addresses of the owners and designated contractors. Local construction officials must then inspect the application and the property to determine whether it conforms with the building codes, the municipal zoning codes as well. And within 20 days, they must either approve the plans and issue the permit or reject it in writing along with the cause of the rejection. And if rejected, the applicant may revise the plan to meet the requirements or appeal their rejection to the Construction Board of Appeals. Some municipalities, they try to play games. I know they do this in my town. When they want to mess around with people, what they'll do is, okay, you submitted a framing, a permit for the construction of the framing, the plumbing, and the electrical. Those are three different departments. So, the framing department, we already went through that, and then they moved, and then they gave your permits to the next department, and now they have 20 days, and then the other department has 20 days. So we have a total of 60 days to get it done. Don't work like that. When you submit an application for building plans, each department has 20 days. It's not 20 plus 20 plus 20. That's 60 days for them to get it done with. Some municipalities, they're arrogant. Maybe it's a way they've been doing it for the longest time, but that's not the right way. Okay. So it shouldn't happen. And if it's taking long, you can file a complaint with the state, with the DCA. The DCA regulates all inspectors, all licensed inspectors, even ones that are working for cities, the municipalities. So good to know. If you ever get a city inspector, a municipal inspector that's asking for bribes to pass an inspection, you could report them to, and you probably should, to the FBI and the DCA. Okay. The DCA will investigate those things. We had an inspector like that in my town of Linden. Then the FBI got involved and they did a sting, and they caught him asking for bribes because he was an inspector in Linden, but yet he's got most of his family works for a city down in City Hall. And so when these plans need to get inspected, when they take those permits and everything, it's got to go through people that are all his family members. And he got caught in the FBI sting, telling the FBI, a project like this can take a while. There's a lot of things happening in these projects, a lot of permits, a lot of stuff going on down at the city. And these things, they could get really jammed up and take a long time to get through. But if you know which gears to grease, things can move along a lot smoother. And then he went and he asked for a bribe of 25,000 or 50,000 or whatever it was. And then they arrested him. Now, it's not a one-time thing. If you got an inspector asking for bribes, they're that confident in it. I've had that happen before. And I remember I usually never did work in the area of Plainfield, but I had one guy in my office. The only area he works is Plainfield, mostly. So I went to ask him, I said, Jose, I'm having an issue with this inspector in Plainfield. What the hell's going on? I've had this property inspected 3 times, and each time he's coming with a new list of things that need to be repaired. They're not allowed to do that. They give you a punch list of things that need to be repaired. You give it to the owner, they fix it, you get it re-inspected. They're only supposed to be re-inspecting those things. This guy keeps coming back with new things and new things. And he laughed, and he's like, yeah, that guy, he's looking for an envelope. Just, put $100 or $200 in an envelope and he'll pass you. I said, I'm not doing that. That's bullshit. He works for the city. That's bribes. He's like, well, if you want the deal to go through, he's like, you can't be making waves. Put the money in an envelope. And I was like, that's some bullshit. I refuse to do that on principle, So next time we went for the inspection, this was the 3rd time now we were going for the inspection, because I talked to him after the 2nd. This is now the 3rd inspection we're going to. And the inspector sees everything. He said, okay, everything looks good, but now you need to do this, this, and this. And he's writing a new punch list for me. Now, in the meantime, I also got a guy that works for the DCA as an inspector on my pool team. So I also asked him about it, and he gave me the name of a lady, and I wrote it down. She was running the DCA. She's the head of the department, and he gave me her name and number, and I had it in my pocket still. So now I'm showing this property the next day, and you know, to him for that reinspection, and he gives me this new punch list again. And I was like, listen, these buyers are gonna miss their rate lock on here. We have to close by a certain date. Every time we are doing inspections, you're giving me new things to fix. I was like, can you just go through the property once and give us a complete list of everything that needs to be fixed so that we could get to the closing on time here? I was like, I can't keep doing this. And he's like, he threw in there a comment that he didn't see an envelope. And I said, excuse me, what are you talking about? And he's like, you don't do much business here. Talk to somebody in your office, they'll tell you. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I dug in my pocket. I said, I pulled out that paper. I was like, how about I just give this lady a call over at the DCA? Maybe she could help guide me better in what to do here, you know? And he just kept writing on his clipboard, didn't look up at me at all. And then he goes, okay, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to pass you on the inspection, but you got to make sure you get these things fixed. So I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. You know, uh, he's corrupt, looking for bribes. So they had a corrupt inspector looking for bribes, and it's his normal way of doing business. You know, apparently it happens in more than one town. Happened in my town of Linden. The guy got arrested. This other guy, no, but who knows? Maybe he did since then. But if you ever do, DCA, FBI. Okay. So once issued, the construction permit may be revoked if it contains any false or misleading info or omissions, or if the construction's not started within 12 months of the permit issue date, or if the work is suspended for 3 months or longer after the work has begun. This is the way that construction permits work in all towns in New Jersey. Okay. That's the way you're supposed to work anyway. We know this is called the Soprano State for a reason. You familiar with that show, The Sopranos? The mobsters? Okay. It's called the Soprano State because we've got these wannabe mobsters, the corrupt people, politicians, inspectors. The state is so damn corrupt. That's why it's so damn expensive. So,
What's the name of the show? Please come again.
oh, The Sopranos.
Sopranos.
Yeah, it used to be on HBO. You could probably find reruns of it on Amazon or whatever. You could find the whole series that you could subscribe to them probably on Netflix or whatever it is that you watch. It's called The Sopranos. I think it's. Let me see how to spell that. I mean, SOP something something. The Sopranos. Yeah, SOPRANOS. Sopranos. It was on HBO for 6 seasons, so that you got 6 years of seasons to watch there of these mobsters. Apparently, it was a very good program. It was a major hit. It came out in 1999. Okay, so this is just the highlights of that construction permit stuff. And anytime you get construction done, inspections need to be done afterwards before anybody can occupy the building to show that there's no condition that causes a threat to the health or safety of the occupants. This is normally known as or called a CO inspection, a certificate of occupancy inspection. Now, that's always required for new construction before anybody can use the property. You got to get that past CO inspection. Now, what if you have an existing property that just got some work done on it? Well, there's a Some municipalities also call that a CO. Others use a different proper name for it. It's called a COC, or Certificate of Compliance. That's for existing structures where work was done. Or if no work is done and it's just a transfer of ownership, some municipalities call that a CO inspection as well. Others give it a separate proper name, which is a CCO, a continued certificate of occupancy. Okay. So either way, anytime we sell real estate, an inspection needs to be done, whether there were improvements done to the property or not. Okay. Now, what it's called, it depends on the municipality, because not all municipalities work the same way. Some refer to all of these inspections as a CO. Others call it new construction CO, existing properties to get work on them. It's a COC, Certificate of Compliance. And ones where no work was done and it's just a transfer of ownership, it's called a Certificate of a Continued Certificate of Occupancy, or CCO. Okay.
So COC is important for exams or just for our
No,
knowledge?
no, they'll probably just refer to it as a CO. So you just got to be aware that some sort of inspection the municipalities do, usually called a CO, Certificate of Occupancy, before anybody can occupy a structure. They make sure that there's no condition that would cause a threat to the health or safety of the occupants. This is just my breakdown. Does the book give you that breakdown too? Yeah, they talk about, yeah, it's in here too in the book. It's just a lot wordier. I
It's
just give
only
you the,
CCO, not COC.
well, they give you certificate of occupancy.
Yeah. Not certificate of compliance is not mentioned anywhere.
Certificate of continuing occupancy, the COC. However, any change, it may be on the next page, 348, where it continues from here. Was that on 349?
No, it's not there.
It's not there.
I can't find it.
No, look at that. Okay, so they don't mention it there. So I do on my slide. So there you go. You get more information from my notes. Good job, Vic. All right. And lastly, in this chapter is building regulations have safety requirements for smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, or fire detectors. Smoke detectors are required on each level of a building and within 10 feet of any sleeping quarter. Carbon monoxide detectors are required to have 10-year sealed, non-removable, non-replaceable batteries as of a law change that got updated in 2019. So your carbon monoxide detectors in your house, they need to be replaced with 10-year sealed batteries. Those that have the 10-year sealed batteries. Now, homes built after 1978 required hardwired detectors but most fire inspectors that I've come across, they want, if it's hardwired detectors, they want them to have battery backups in them, because often fire departments know these fire inspectors, they used to be firemen at one point, right? They're now inspectors. They know that when there's a fire, wires get melted, short circuits happen, the alarms won't work. You're better off having a battery backup on there so that you know that those detectors will still work and alert people. So I've had some experienced fire inspectors that say, yeah, you know what? I hate that law. I know it requires the hardwired detectors, but I'd feel more comfortable with the battery backup as well. So they wouldn't pass me until I had my clients put a battery powered smoke detectors in. So, you know what I do? Um, I'll tell you in a second. Let me first read the next one here. Fire extinguishers must be mounted in the kitchen or within 10 feet of them using the hardware they came with. They must be rated to put out ABC type fires and must be under 10 pounds so that you could easily get access to them. But as of 325, it's no 2025, it's no longer required by state law. However, local fire officials may still require them and often do. Okay. Um, so this is what I do. I suggest that you do it when you start working in the business too. If you're getting listings, because this is always going to come up at one point in time. Um, you carry around one of those foldable step ladders because you're going to need one at one point in time. Um, I mean, you could always just tell the homeowner to do it, but this way, sometimes you can uh, speed along the process and not require having to schedule new inspections and everything. Like I had a fire inspector tell me he felt more comfortable if we had a battery detector, smoke detector in there instead of just the hardwired ones. And we could always schedule a new inspection and pay for a new inspection and all that. And I was like, whoa, 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 hold on a second. I said, I got a smoke detector in my truck and I got a drill with me. Um, Let me just install that. And he's like, well, I can't wait around while you're installing that. I was like, well, can you come back, go to another appointment and come back? You know? And he's like, okay, I could do that. So we did that, and I was able still to get inspected that day and passed because I carry around spare smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, uh, fire extinguishers under 10 pounds rated to put out ABC type fires, which actually came in handy one time when I came across a car fire on the parkway. I helped them extinguish the car fire, and that came in handy. Um, but I use it for this purpose, and then I just bill. If I have to install them, I just bill the homeowner for whatever I'm using, for whatever it costs me. I hold on to the receipt and I just bill them for it. Um, okay, so you may want to make this note in your book there that state law also requires one properly installed carbon monoxide detector and an approved fire extinguisher, even though state law no longer requires the fire extinguisher part, but your local municipality does. And under carbon monoxide detector, write 10-year sealed battery, because that's a new law. It should state that here, but it doesn't. And the fire extinguisher should be under 10 pounds, so it's small, rated to put out ABC type fires. Now, I got a next slide that's going to show you about that a little bit. What is an ABC fire? Well, extinguisher rated to put out A, that's trash, wood, paper, your typical combustibles. B fires are liquids, gases, and solvents. And C class fires are electrical fires. Okay, you wouldn't want to put liquids on that, right? So it's going to be a dry spray chemical component that puts out all three of these types of fires. Now, the law that went into effect the state law that originally went into effect that required this was when there was acting Governor Richard Cody in 2005. He took over for was that McGreevey? Governor McGreevey. He bowed out because he had a scandal because it came out that even though he was married with kids, he had some sort of um, affair with another man, and that came out in that big scandal, and he ended up bowing out of the governorship, and then Richard Cody took over for him. And during a meeting at a school, a fire prevention thing where they teach kids at school fire prevention laws. They were talking about the recent rash of fires that were going on in 2005 there, where you had the mother that was cooking and had the pots and pans, and the little child there being curious as they are, they were reaching up and they grabbed the handle and it came down on them, and grease went on the child and caused a grease fire. So the mother who's panicking, you got a sink right there. They throw water because that's your first initial instinct on the fire, try to put it out. But that's the worst thing you could do for a grease fire. It spreads the fire. And there was a rash of these incidents that were happening then within a small frame of time. And they were discussing them at this fire prevention thing. So a fifth grader suggested, why don't you just pass a law that requires a fire extinguisher in the kitchen? So what a novel idea. So he created a law that required that. And that's where that came from. Until just this past year, our last governor, whatever the hell his name is there, he, for some reason, did away with that rule as a state law requirement. But local municipalities, I found, still kept it, because I've done a couple of sales, and the local municipalities like Woodbridge, they still require that fire extinguisher. Okay. And the last thing here, hotel, motel, multiple dwelling health and safety law. Enacted to ensure residents of New Jersey have decent, standard, and safe units for dwelling space. A state inspection is often required, which we refer to as a green card inspection, for those buildings every 5 years that have 3 or more rental units, not counting the unit the landlord or the owner lives in. So there's 3 or more rental spaces available. And hotels and motels that have 10 units or more, or sleeping facilities for 25 persons, get inspected at least once every 3 years, and those can be unannounced spot inspections. Okay, we don't need to memorize how many units or how often. We do need to know that for the buildings with 3 or more units, though. Okay, so 3 or more units once every 5 years, state inspection. Okay, they probably won't refer to it on the exam as a green card. I'll just refer to it as a state inspection. Okay. And that's where we highlight those things on page 348 under hotel, motel, dwelling, health and safety law. And on the side, I just wrote state green card inspection. Got it? Okay. That's it for chapter 18. Another one bites the dust. Let's do the key terms to review and then take our lunch break. So, charges to developers for extra roads, schools, and so forth.
Stop.
What do we call those charges to developers for
Impact
extra
fees.
rules and so forth? Impact fees, 7 is A, to help the community deal with the impact of all that additional people that'll be living there. Test of soils absorption and drainage capacities.
Percolation test.
The PERC test, that's correct. 10 is B. Division of property into more than one building lot.
Subdivision.
16 is C, it's a subdivision. Community with dense zoning and developers plan for the entire land use. It's actually called a planned unit development. 12 is D, or PUD for short. Group setting standards for local subdivisions. Who puts those standards and requirements?
Planning board.
The planning board. 13 is E. A halt to development in an area.
A halt to development. Uh, Moratorium.
Correct. The moratorium. 9 is F. That's a new word for a lot of people. Moratorium. Okay. New Jersey standards for building.
UCC.
The UCC. 17 is G. The United States requirement for some developments to be registered with the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Interstate land
Yep.
sales.
Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. 8 is H. State regulations for building of new homes. For builders of new homes, I'm sorry.
State regulations.
That's worded a little weird, the way they're asking it. State regulations for builders of new homes. How about this? A state regulation for builders of new homes that require them to purchase this for the buyers. That all new construction must come with.
Warranty and.
Yep, 10-year builder's warranty. So the Warranty and Builders Registration Act.
Registration Act.
18
So should I
is
change
I.
that? State regulations for builders of new homes?
I mean, it is regulations. It's a regulation that requires a 10-year warranty come with the property, you know.
Yeah.
18 is I. But if you say warranty, you're giving it away. So I'm not sure exactly how to word that right away. Permits buyers up to 7 calendar days to cancel contracts for the lease or purchase of such lands.
That act. Real Estate Sales Full Disclosure Act.
Yep, 15 is J. Law requiring registration of certain developments within New Jersey. It's the Planned Real Estate Development Act. 11 is K. Zoning that allows more living units per acre than usual.
Zoning that allows. Density zoning.
Density zoning, correct. 5 is L. Allows you to have denser zoning, putting more properties closer together than normally allowed. It's a lot denser. So 5 was L. A map of a town section or a subdivision.
Plat.
A plat map. 14 is M. New Jersey state agency that approves and registers some out-of-state property.
Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales
Control. Yep, 1 is N, correct. The Bureau of Subdivided Land Sales Control. 1 is N. A local municipality's authorization for building plans.
Construction permit.
Yep, construction permit. 3 is O. Engineering reports often required before building permits are issued. Especially on federal projects.
Environmental impact statement.
Yep, the EIS, Environmental Impact Statement. 6 is P. Turning over of private property, subdivision streets as an example, to a municipality. What do you call it when you give
dedication?
You dedicate that land to the government. 4 is Q, correct. And putting living units close together to leave more open space.
Clustering.
Clustering. 2 is R, correct. And that concludes chapter 18.